having us here. Thought I was going to get away without having to record my voice, but okay. Anyways, uh, just want to give a brief run through of carbon cashback, why we think it's a good policy, why we're promoting it here. We're convinced and that it should be included in the suite of policies that Hawaii enacts so that it can most cost effectively transition to a low carbon economy and achieve its climate and energy goals that the state has set out for itself. This policy can be implemented at no cost to taxpayers. In fact, most households would come out financially ahead. I'll go into those results a little bit later, with low-income families faring the best. It would have only minor impacts on the economic growth, and in the long run would bring benefits to the entire economy. And if a policy were enacted nationally, as we sort of saw British Columbia influencing the rest of Canada, it would help us avoid many of the adverse impacts of climate change. But kind of to your interests here, reviewing last session's testimony, we understand that the Chamber has two primary concerns with this policy. First, that the carbon fee might be regressive. In other words, that it could disproportionately affect low-income households. And second, that the policy might compromise the competitiveness of Hawaii industries in the national and global markets. So go ahead, in the rest of the presentation, we'll be addressing those points as well as others around carbon cashback.
Move forward.
Yeah, sorry, I'm slow here. So just a brief outline. As I said, I want to talk about the impacts. Sorry, I want to first start with the impacts of climate change on the business community, these basically hidden costs, and then the need to address these. As I said, carbon cashback, we believe, is a necessary policy to address what is the primary contributor to climate change, namely the combustion of fossil fuels. After that, I want to share some results from two University of Hawaii studies that estimated the economic impacts of Hawaii implementing carbon cashback. And finally, I'd like to touch on the support for carbon cashback from various business groups, government agencies, and environmental groups. So moving on here, in terms of climate change, the cost to businesses, I think we've all seen the effects of climate change one way or another in our lives, whether it's folks with businesses near the airport in Oahu, seeing the flooding there, whether it's rain bombs in Hawaii, or whether you enjoy the ocean and seeing coral bleaching. These extremes in weather are increasing the cost to businesses. Most immediately, there's damages to infrastructure, which are leading to increased higher insurance costs. And in some areas of the country, folks can't even get insurance to protect them against these potential damages. Throughout the world, climate disasters have caused supply chain disruptions, leading to higher costs of doing business and more volatile prices for their goods and services. And the combination of these volatile prices and supply chain disruptions dampen consumer activity, so a further drag on the economy, if you will. And finally, climate change also affects government revenues and expenditures. As damages negatively impact businesses and hence economic activity, the government's going to be collecting less revenue. But the government also needs to respond to these damages, and that's draining from its coffers, taking money for adaptation and resilience, whereas the money instead could go for R&D or activities that stimulate economic growth. Okay, so what do we do about this situation, right? How do we best address climate change, and therefore lessen the cost of climate change to businesses? In other words, what makes a good climate change policy? I would say the first 2 points go together here, that it's important that the policy is both cost effective and equitable. So cost effectiveness simply meaning let's reduce emissions where it's least costly, right? No sense paying extra money to reduce emissions if we don't have to. And the second, in terms of being equitable, everybody really should have the same right to a clean environment. So ideally, the policy would recognize that and actually even be progressive so that low-income households, which are often facing the brunt of climate change, whether it's because of heat deserts or what have you, that actually come out more ahead than the wealthier that have more options to address this. In terms of for the business community and also going on the topic of cost effectiveness, the policy should shy away from mandates and prescriptive solutions, right? No option should be taken off the table, which is often a problem with very prescriptive policies or mandates. And last, a good climate policy should also incentivize innovation in low carbon technologies without picking winners and losers. Doing so will encourage economic growth. And Carbon Cashback succeeds in all four of these areas, and we'll dig deeper into that in the next slides. So let me first talk about how Carbon Cashback works. And apologies if this is a review for a lot of people. So Carbon Cashback would simply add a fee to the state's existing environmental response, energy and food security tax, or more formally, the barrel tax. Thus, no new mechanisms would be needed for the collection of revenues. But unlike a tax, the additional fee's purpose is not to raise revenues. It is to change behavior and spur innovation by internalizing these external costs that climate change is bringing about on us. In terms of the fee would be assessed just as with the barrel tax on each imported refined petroleum product or BTU of non-petroleum fossil fuels imported, as well as each barrel of refined product produced by our refinery here. Now, the fuel distributors would then need to decide how much of the fee to pass on to consumers by way of higher energy prices. Presumably, they will pass some of it on, no requirement of how much. But the amount of the fee that individuals and businesses would pay would depend on how much and the kind of goods and services they consume. In general, wealthier households would pay more of the fee since they consume more goods and services, right? Have more cars, have bigger homes, more electricity usage, etc. So again, unlike a tax, the revenues raised by the fees would be distributed back to all residents of Hawaii in equal shares via a refundable tax credit, making use of the existing infrastructure, the Department of Taxation for individual tax returns. So again, no new mechanisms are needed here, whether to distribute the revenues. Each adult income tax filer would receive the same rebate or dividend, and each minor would receive a half share. All of this independent of income. Therefore, the amount of the fee any individual would pay depends on the individual's purchase decisions, but everyone would receive the same dividend. So again, higher income folks will in general pay more in terms of fees, and lower income folks will fare better under the policy, making it progressive. So having described the policy, let me go into some of the advantages of this policy, especially over many of the more traditional policies that the US and the state of Hawaii have chosen to enact to deal with our emissions. The policy is equitable in that it's economy-wide. It addresses emissions throughout the economy. So it's not targeting one specific sector. And again, this allows emissions to be reduced where it is most cost effective. It addresses the operations of both existing and new capital. So compare this to our corporate average fuel economy standard for vehicles. All that policy does is address new technology, or new vehicles. It fails to address emissions from the existing stock of vehicles. Again, this is going to capture all emissions. And unlike mandates, this policy places no restrictions on what a business or an individual chooses to do or how it chooses to reduce its emissions, right? There's complete freedom of choice here. So again, no options are taken off the table. This policy, once implemented, would probably be similar to the Alaska Fund for Oil Revenues in that it would be very durable. No lawmaker is going to want to take away people's dividends once they start receiving them. This contrasts with other policies, which often can vacillate back and forth in stringency or what have you, depending on what lawmakers are going to decide. But again, I can't imagine a lawmaker trying to take away the dividend and expect to be reelected. The policy is both easy to implement, as I described before, and it doesn't grow government, right? There are no additional mechanisms that are needed. We have everything in place. We have the existing barrel tax. We have an income tax. We can collect revenues, and we can disperse these revenues in the form of a dividend. And unlike many other regulations, this one provides the revenues or provides dividends back to households so that they can then change gives them the financial wherewithal to change their decisions so they can move to be less carbon emitting. So again, I'll go back to the CAFE standard. CAFE standard raises the cost of new vehicles, and that trickles down to raising the cost of existing vehicles. And so that's great. The fuel efficiency improves, but there's no finances to help, especially lower and middle income families, purchase these higher efficiency vehicles. Whereas with carbon cashback, money would be put in their pockets that they can help them make those changes. So let me go from here. I've talked a lot, kind of generalities about the carbon cashback policy. I'd like now to say a few things about, or put some numbers behind what I've said here. And so I'm just going to pull from two recent studies that UHERO did, one for the legislature and one for the Tax Review Commission. For the Tax Review Commission, that work led to the Tax Review Commission saying that Hawaii, as its first recommendation, Hawaii should implement carbon cashback. So the policy that I'm looking at, or from the numbers I'm drawing from, is one in which Hawaii would implement a carbon fee of $50 a ton of carbon in 2025, escalating to $70 by 2045. $70 is basically equivalent to 63 cents a gallon of gasoline. So even at these relatively low levels of carbon pricing, the analysis found that Hawaii would reduce its emissions 13% below the level it would have achieved if this policy were not in place. And this comes at a very small impact on the growth in economic activity. With this policy, the study found that economic growth, or the economy, grew at 1.65% versus without the policy at 1.67%. Really a barely noticeable difference there. The policy also, since the money and the revenues go back to households and lower and middle income households benefit, it shows an increase in consumer spending. Also, with this increase in fossil fuel prices, we see this move to cleaner energy technology and jobs in that sector, and consequently a reduction in the imports of fossil fuels. This being that also means that fewer dollars are going out of our state towards energy, right? If we're leaving more of those dollars in the state for domestically produced energy. Next, in terms of impacts on households. Oh, sorry.
Would it be in terms of questions? There are some questions that I'd like to ask. Should I wait till the presentation is over?
Yeah, I think it'd be best so that we can all kind of hear what Paul has to say, and then we can ask questions.
Okay.
You guys can gang up on me all at once that way. So, anyways. Okay, so back to what the study showed about household spending power, the change in personal consumption over time. So the figure here is showing just that, the change in household consumption for 5 different income groups. So the study broke up households into Hawaii into 5 income groups, with the lowest quintile or income group on the left, moving across to the right with the highest income group. And 2 things I think that are important to notice in this figure. One is it shows that on average, households of all income quintiles would benefit financially from this policy. With the lowest income households benefiting the most. So the policy provides a financial benefit to households on average. Not all households will win, but the majority will. And it's an extremely progressive policy. To put some numbers, the study found that in the first year, when there's a $50 per metric ton of CO2 applied, so basically 45 cents a gallon of gasoline, that low-income households were paying about $100 more in goods and services because of higher energy costs, but they were receiving a little over $1,000 in the dividend. So on net, or in balance, they come out $900 ahead, which is quite substantial. So I'll go to the next slide to keep this moving along here.
Yeah, we are going a little bit over time.
Okay, sorry. Let me I'll speed it up. So in terms of business impacts, we'll go on to the next slide. So the advantage of this policy, as opposed to really a shock to the system, is the carbon fee would gradually and predictably rise over time, so businesses can react to this. Now, the study I talked about started with a $50 a ton of carbon, but the policy that we're proposing in the next legislative session will start at only 5 cents a gallon. Next year, go up to 10 cents a gallon, and for the next 8 years, go up by 10 cents a gallon after that. So gives businesses and households plenty of time to adjust and start making their decisions and transitioning to a lower carbon economy. We'll go to the next one, Noel. In terms of impacts on competitiveness, going back to one of the concerns rightfully raised by the Chamber of Commerce, I talked about the overall economic impacts. In terms of economic impacts on exports, there is a slight decline from if the policy weren't in place, but exports still expand year over year, basically by about 0.7% per year instead of 0.9%. The impacts on tourism are extremely small because tourism is such an inelastic good. Hawaii is a unique experience, not easy to substitute your Hawaii vacation for a trip to Iowa or something. So anyways, going on to the next one, the support for this policy is quite widespread. In fact, many conservatives like George Shultz and others have been advocating for this policy, well, until he died, sorry, advocating for this policy at the national and the global level. And there's been support for market-based policies, for example, from the US Chamber of Commerce, saying that inaction on climate change is not an option and it supports market-based approaches. The US Business Roundtable says that any market-based approach must include a price on carbon. And that's exactly what carbon cashback is. There's also been positive statements for carbon cashback from the American Bankers Association, Commercial Real Estate Financial Council. Locally, we have the Climate Change Commission, the Maui Council. You see 2 representatives from the business community as part of our team. Government agencies, other government agencies, DLNR, environmental community ranging from Blue Planet, the Nature Conservancy, and Ulupono. Last, if I can just kind of give a bottom line that we believe carbon cashback will serve as a foundational policy that will augment and multiply the impact of other efforts. It'll help us meet our goal, the state's goal of net zero by 2045. And it does it in an equitable and cost-effective manner. Does it gradually, allowing businesses to make the transition, and thereby facilitating innovation and growth. And I'll stop there, and sorry for taking so much time.
Eliza, should I take it from here?
Yeah, I think John Kim had questions. If you want.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to go into. And I just want to say that we really appreciate this time with you all. So without further ado, let's go to the questions, and I hope that will evolve into a overall discussion until the hour's over. So John?
Yes. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Appreciate this idea. I love it. I think there's many great attributes and all the things that you talked about. Things that I liked about most of all is idea of net zero and equity, and also making a contribution to the underserved and innovation. But I do have a couple of questions. It's coming from a place of ignorance. It's not to question this, but just for me to understand. Because one of the big things that I saw in Alaska, where they have a dividend program, but Alaska also suffers with a high rate of alcoholism and drug use at the same time. So has there been any study or research you guys may know? But that's something that has been on my mind a lot, because how do we make Hawaii healthy? How do we make ourselves to be self-reliant without falling a trap to money that may not help the state for the long haul? So wanted to see if you guys had any insight.
So your concern is that people will use this money that they get for drugs and alcohol rather than to benefit their family or to transition?
No. That's not what I was
Okay.
asking. Has there been a study or research that shows that having a dividend program has a direct correlation to well-being of its citizens, as opposed to you guys mentioned something about Alaska, and I go, well, Alaska has a kind of a tenuous history of abuse and misuse. So that was my question.
Thank you. So I think that was happening prior to the dividend program that they put in place, the drugs and alcohol. So I don't know that that program brought it about. But anybody from the Carbon Cashback group have any response? One of the things they've been looking at a basic dividend. I forget what they call it. Andrew Yang was advocating it. And
universal basic income.
Thank you. Yes. And the studies there, they've been doing pilot studies, show that for the most part, it really improves family well-being. So that may be one indication or answer to your question. Did you have another question?
In terms of how does this program encourage innovation?
Oh, wonderful question. Who wants to answer that? Noel or Carolyn, why don't you show how businesses have been innovating using the assistance of Hawaii Energy?
Well, it's not directly related to any sort of dividend program, but I mean, I think for those that are familiar with our Hawaii energy efficiency programs, we operate the ratepayer funded efficiency portfolio, and over the last 12 years or so, I would say we've grown our small business programs, specifically targeting efficiency upgrades in the lighting space. And then most recently in response to the COVID pandemic, we initiated a grant program to support mainly at the time of the shutdowns, the transition for a lot of small businesses from in-person food service to takeout and takeaway. And that grant program funded, hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring in additional commercial kitchen equipment into facilities that didn't already have that, helping them to really keep the doors open and reduce operating costs at a time when revenues were really low. So it's not a direct correlation to what's being necessarily proposed with this dividend program, but we have incentives, rebates, grant programs that have operated under the umbrella of the Hawaii Energy Program. We've seen some pretty fantastic business innovation around how you can leverage the funding that's available to really modify your business operations to meet changing needs on the residential side. So for we've also seen that our direct install or appliance programs have been heavily sought after as a means to allow additional income, disposable income for customers. So being able to reduce your monthly energy bills, on average for the businesses that are participating in our Energy Advantage program, we see about an average of $3,000 in bill savings a year for their electricity bills. So I guess, I'm not sure exactly, Joanne, what you wanted me to touch on, but, I think that there are existing programs that we operate that really do help through the incentive structures that they have to support businesses in reducing operating costs and allowing them to diversify their operations.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Caroline. I also would like to just add, John, thanks very much for your brilliant questions. By the way, we'll take away one of the first question is for us a takeaway, right? So let's figure out what if there are any studies out there that demonstrate correlation between this type of dividend program and social benefit. I think that's a brilliant question. But on the question about how does something like this stimulate innovation, what we believe is that because there is this line of sight to increasing cost of fossil solutions, right, or let's call it high carbon solutions. It's predictable, it's gradual. There will be, let's call it creative tension, right? There'll be this tension for solutions. They could be technological, they could be process that will result in increased efficiency, right? So a lot of these things that we're seeing today, heat pumps, electric vehicles, et cetera, they're about energy efficiency, clean energy solutions, transportation. There's kind of redundant there, but what it does is it creates this tension. So there are companies out there that are going to want to take advantage of that, create solutions that may not exist today so that households, businesses can actually leverage less energy for, a desired task. So that's how we envision it. It creates this tension for action. Hopefully that helps.
That does help. And I like the idea. But as a STEM proponent and advocate, I also would like to see a more direct program support for the STEM program that is in line with the energy efficiency or carbon minimization. I think it is helpful to be able to support the underserved, but for the long haul, we need to create a underlying STEM infrastructure where we can work on get better opportunities and better jobs. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have is a lot of our jobs are minimum wage jobs or close to minimum wage jobs, supporting tourism, which is opposite of what we want to do. It doesn't support carbon minimization. Mm-hmm. So when I see a new program come up, and I tend to look at it and go, okay, let's talk about innovation. Let's talk about science and technology and engineering. How do we create those opportunities and industry that's going to minimize the carbons and minimize the energy use for the long haul? If that can be created, something like, because I think is part of the study that needs to be done anyway. Correlation
Thank
between
you.
dividends and
Yeah, I think you're talking about a really big area, the development of STEM. I don't know that this program can address all of that, but I think Kelly was wanting to say something about innovation at a larger scale than just a household small business level. And maybe she has some of that answer for you. Kelly?
Thank you, Joanne. Aloha, John. Thank you for the question. It's kind of right up our alley because our company, Pacific Biodiesel, is 28 years old, and it has been an incredible struggle. I mean, there's so many times we really should have gone out of business, and instead Bob and I leveraged everything we had just to keep ourselves alive. One of the most unpredictable issues we have to deal with is the price of fossil fuels, because it goes up and down and up and down. And where our price has been very stable, we have real costs. We know what our feedstock costs are. We know what our production costs are. We can give a fair price with a relatively stable revenue margin. But it's hard to do that when you're competing against the cost of a barrel that could be as low as $50 or as high as $200, and you don't know what's happening from month to month. So having this steady increase with this tax really helps the renewable energy companies get some feeling of support and stability to be able to invest in these innovations. I feel like our company, the reason why we're the only commercial biofuel company in Hawaii is because it's hard, and most people can't make a living at this. You have to be willing to, and we have been, you have to be willing to lose everything in order to make it in this industry because of the volatility of pricing. So for me, when I look at the carbon cashback and the fact that it can benefit the average household, along with giving that more of an incentive for renewable energy companies to be able to compete against fossil fuels. And these are large companies that have decades-old investments by the federal government in their infrastructure, and we don't. We're most of the renewable energy companies you see are creating all of our infrastructure now, and we have to do it ourselves. We're getting a little bit help here and there. We've seen some major scammers come through our state when the whole algae bubble was happening and take a lot of money out of our state. But those of us who are here, who are based here, who are working here and trying to push the renewable energy envelope, we need some kind of we need to see in the future some kind of a realistic effort by the government to say, we believe in renewable, and here's what we're going to do to help you folks get a leg up and to support your innovations. So, for me, it's a very real thing because we've been reaching out, innovating. We've become, our latest thing is now we're into food security because we're producing as a way to stay alive. We have to create high value products. So now we're doing cooking oils, sunflower and macadamia nut cooking oils that we're selling to Costco. But those innovations are expensive to get a foothold in order to develop this kind of revenue stream that is going to help. I mean, you look at a bottle of cooking oil that could be, $10 maybe for a liter, and we're asking people, and we're only selling our fuel for $4 for a gallon. So, we need some kind of an offset support from our government. And for us, we've gotten some from the federal government, very little from the state and the county.
Okay, thank you. So
Joanne, I have a question when you have a chance.
Yes, no, I want to hear the questions. We only have another 15 minutes, so go ahead, Adrian.
Okay, so I do think that a carbon cashback system or a carbon tax is probably the most efficient way, most economists agree, efficient way of reducing carbon emissions. And I do think that the stability that something like your carbon cashback program would provide is desirable for businesses because there's always like stability and knowing what's going to happen. But I am concerned about doing it at a state level rather than a federal level, because at the carbon cashback system that you're pushing, it doesn't have any way to tax dirty imports, does it? It doesn't have a way of, like, if something's coming from Vietnam or Texas, that was manufactured using dirtier fuels, there's no way to tax that to compensate the tax that's going to be placed on Hawaii businesses. Is that correct?
Paul?
You're absolutely correct, right? You can't do that because of the Constitution. It would violate the Commerce Clause.
So for me, that's a concern. So my business, Island Plastic Bags, is a manufacturer. So we aren't competing on tourism. We're competing on dollars and cents for a commodity. And so, you know, Vietnam manufacturing is already cheaper than me. Like manufacturing in Texas and shipping it here, depending on shipping, could be cheaper than me. I'm concerned that jobs for manufacturing and other heavy energy intensive industries might move out of Hawaii if they're getting taxed to other jurisdictions where they don't have this tax. And that would be a loss of jobs and revenues. I did a quick calculation based on what you guys sent beforehand. We calculate our Island Plastic Bags calculates their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So we have ideas of what our carbon is. And so I took your gasoline fee and your diesel fee. I didn't see your $50 per megaton pricing for propane at the low end. So I just used the $50 per ton megaton against our propane emissions. And then for HECO, I just took our scope 2 emissions because I can't break out which emissions are from fuel, which emissions are from H power, you know, just, I don't have that kind of information. So this is a rough estimate. I just had all that preface to say that this is a rough estimate but for Island Plastic Bags under a $50 per megaton tax, we would pay about $15,500 a year. And then under the $70 one, we would pay about $24,700 a year. And that's, I mean, when you're talking about your customers and it's a commodity like plastic bags, like price is king. And so that's just a huge concern I have as a manufacturer. And I'm worried about other energy intensive industries moving out of Hawaii because it's already hard to do business here. You know, why not, you know, move outsource from Vietnam, outsource from the West Coast and stuff like that, and just not have manufacturing jobs here. I just have the distribution here.
Thank you for raising that point. Paul, you want to respond?
I agree with you. It is a concern. That's partly why we have changed the bill to start at a lower price instead of the $50. Just to be clear, that's per metric ton. So
yeah. Well, I mean, Well, I mean, we pull about, let's see, 401 megawatts of electricity from HECO, and then we have solar panels on our roof, but it doesn't generate all the electricity that we need. So that's as you know, like HECO, your scope 2 emissions are probably going to be the biggest source of tax, you know, for this carbon tax. And so I calculated based off 401 megatons, and then I pulled the EPA's emissions factors for, you know, HECO's emissions, and then multiplied that by the $50 per megaton or the $70 per megaton.
So on the, I'll just say quickly, sorry, on the HECO side, I think there's an open issue here of how much the PUC should allow HECO to pass through of the carbon price. Because oh, go ahead. Sorry, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big framework is that ultimately we want to see a national legislation so that at least among the states, there's an even playing field. And the other thing is, I talk about John's point about innovation. Can you do plastic bags without oil? Or can HECO generate electricity without oil, you know, with something else? And so, for example, on Kauai, where we have an electric co-op, we are at 60% renewables in our generation, almost 70 now. And when there was the Ukrainian war, the energy price did not spike like it did for HECO. So hopefully in moving in that direction, we make ourselves more immune to oil prices. Now, I don't know if I answered that. So
Well, also remember that Kauai KIUC just signed a contract for biodiesel, so they are finding ways to replace oil. HECO also uses a lot of biodiesel, so they're also finding ways to replace fossil oil.
So that's one way to divorce yourself from these price increases that the
Yeah,
carbon
but
price-
like if the hit will come up front, the innovation will come
Yes,
later.
that's
So
true.
By
That
the
is true.
time the innovation comes, the manufacturing jobs may already be in different places. You know, it's not like this is one for one, like, you know, this is all trending in the same direction at the same time.
Yeah.
That
And I think that's an issue with any innovation, right? You start one
Correct.
innovation. When cars were manufactured, Chicago was filled with the horse manure with a horse and carriage. And within 10 years, there was no horses and carriages in Chicago anymore. So I think the idea is that it will affect people. So if we know ahead of time, perhaps with this tension for solution, I like that phrase, tension for solution, we can get ahead and help current industry and figure out people in the science and technology can start working with the industry and say, how do we help the current industry who want to stay in business? But it takes time.
But thank you for your point. It's harder when we're doing it in isolation than as a national policy.
Well, the great thing about doing it nationally, as Paul said, they have the ability to create border taxes. Like European Union's considering that, you know, like dirtier steel has to be taxed so that
Right.
it's fair. But if Hawaii's the only one doing it, then somebody in Texas can manufacture the same bag I am and not have to pay that tax when it's brought in. And so that's what I'm more worried about other jurisdictions not being on the same level playing
Internationally.
field. Yeah, well, internationally, and so yeah, of course, like for trash liners, not only do you have the domestic market you have to compete against, you also have Vietnam, Malaysia, China,
Right.
you know, all the Southeast Asian countries producing them as well. And so not only am I competing with them on labor, on electricity costs, you know, mine's 44 cents or 41 cents now per kilowatt hour. I'm going to have to be competing with them on a carbon tax as well. And so that's my concern.
Yes, thank you. We have 7 minutes more, 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Does anybody else have a burning question?
I just had a comment for you, Jen. One of the other things, just for while you guys are going into a session and you're going to present this, a couple other things that are coming up for businesses in Hawaii right now that that will impact this is minimum wage increases, and then also the unemployment insurance fund increase. And so because of those two things, our expenses are going to be even higher. And so I just throw that out there because I expect that will be pushed back as well when you guys come to the ledge for this. I know those are things that we're focused on at the chamber and we're very concerned about because our businesses are still recovering from COVID, if they made it through COVID. And then now the impact of the fires has hurt everyone in some way or another. So just kind of want to throw those out there to you as possible other arguments.
Thank you very much. Those are important things for us to be aware of. I don't know how those increases compare with a carbon tax, but that we should, or a carbon fee, but we should try to figure that out. Any comments from our economists right now on that point?
I guess, I mean, if we're really going to reduce our emissions and try and meet Hawaii's goal, it's going to come at some costs, right? And so if we're sincere about making that transition, carbon cashback is shown over and over in economic studies is the most cost-effective way to do that. So I just...
And the least hardship way, but that doesn't, you know, negate the issues that small businesses have to deal with of unemployment insurance and minimum wage. But in the law, well, you know, Carolyn, you told us that the businesses you worked with and the household, there was some incredible figure in terms of the savings that you've gained, 240 million or something. Can you,
over the life of the measures. I mean, this is specific to all of the efficiency measures that have been installed over, a decade, and bill savings are real. And I think they're in a critical piece of managing costs. To Adrian's point, I mean, being competitive. I think that it's what we've seen though, as well as it's not one. It's not one mechanism that's going to get us to our climate goals. So it's going to need to be multiple streams of programming that allow for innovation. And I think it's balancing, to the point that was made, Eliza made, it's balancing where the costs and benefits are. And really one of the things that we're working on, and I think is, Noel, I believe you may have mentioned this as well, is that there's a lot of externalities that aren't necessarily accounted for in terms of cost. And so that's something we're trying to really, the non-energy dollar benefits associated with these changes that really have significant impacts on overall business well-being. So that's something, we're continuing to pursue and try and bring to on the Hawaii energy side, try and bring to the legislature as, additional points for consideration.
This creative tension, it doesn't apply only to large scale innovation, but to a small business. They see these 3 increasing costs coming to them. And if they actually look not very far to like Hawaii Energy and can make the shift and save $3,000, they're not only alleviating their energy costs, but they're creating some surplus to cover some of their other costs.
To your point though, Joanne, like the creative tension for my business, as I'm looking forward at, what plastic regulation is going to look like, what carbon taxes is going to look like, what it looks like to me is I need to move my manufacturing to other, like to move it to Vietnam to be cheaper, to move it to Washington State or move it to Texas, and do less manufacturing here, reduce the number of jobs I have here, less minimum wage working, issues, less unemployment tax, less having to worry about higher energy costs. Like, you're talking about creative tension. Well, there are negatives in addition to positives. This
Absolutely.
is not,
But the thing is, each business has to make their choices, right? And for you, the choice might be to move out of state, but there might be other businesses that have a high priority for staying here, whether it's, local families, 3 generations or whatever it is. And then if they can find a way to stay by reducing their energy costs, and because they've been stimulated to do this tension really,
but
then
it would be a false saving, because I'm moving my manufacturing to Vietnam. I'm still bringing in products that are made with dirtier energy. The fact that, like, that you don't see those numbers in Hawaii's numbers doesn't mean that the climate isn't warming because I'm buying bags from Vietnam,
But we cannot control the whole world. And what we're trying to do is actually create a microcosm in Hawaii of a place where we're net zero on oil or fossil fuels. And we feel that that's going to, in the long run, make for a better way to do business and to live. Because if we have to keep dealing with this climate change, it's almost futile. If you look at the cost, you look at Maui, you just can't keep addressing that in a way that's viable.
I mean, I agree that
I'm talking too much.
I agree that on the federal level it makes sense, but it just doesn't make sense when at the state level, when you can go across jurisdictions and emit there, not get taxed, and then just import the stuff. That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, I respect that. We're coming to the close, actually. It's 3:00. First of all, thank you so much to Eliza and Nadia and the policy committee for allowing us to make this presentation. I don't know that we really got all the questions answered, and if there's a way to continue the discussion, we'd love to do that. Maybe we can host or something, or if you find an avenue in your chamber work where we can participate, we'd love to do that. our hope is, I think, Noel, you wanted to maybe say a closing thing for our group and then let Eliza close.
Yes, I mean, it's an incredible conversation we've had here today. Obviously, nothing's going to be perfect. There are pros and cons across the board. And at the end of the day, we have to make decisions that will, benefit our community, our economy, the environment, the planet. So it's not an easy task. And also we'll acknowledge that carbon cashback is just one of several things we need to do. This doesn't replace a number of the solutions that also need to be put in place. So I know John, you had a question that we didn't quite answer. We can get back to you. I think we can reach you somehow via email.
I would love it. I would love an opportunity to continue dialogue.
Yes, and then lastly, Caroline, this is kind of tied to what your organization does. I think it's worth restating that there's so much funding out there, right, at the federal level. A lot of money that's on the table for us to be able to leverage for a number of things: energy, EVs, charging infrastructure, et cetera. And the critical thing is that this is unprecedented. It's also not durable. It could go away, after the next administration, or could be tapered quite a bit. So regardless of what we're talking about here, there's a lot of money out there that can be used to help decarbonize your operations. And I encourage you to look into that. Thank you.
Eliza, would it be possible if everybody gives permission for us to get, we actually have seen the email addresses so that we can stay in contact with those of you who want to stay in contact?
I do.
Is there anybody who objects to us having your email address? Okay, thank you. That will be a way we can stay in touch.
And I think I gave everyone your email address, everyone from your group's email addresses as well in a previous email, but I can resend that as well, Joanne.
That'll be great. And if you want, you have the recording if anybody wants. And if anybody wants a copy of our PowerPoint, we're happy to share that too. So maybe we can send that to you, Eliza, and you can send that.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much for your time today. And, I think that this is a really important conversation that we're having, and there's a lot of different competing interests, but you're right. I mean, it's always going to be hard. It's never going to be a smooth sailing situation. So we appreciate you guys coming and hearing us out. And I hope that we can continue this dialogue, and I will share that information with the committee. And then committee members, if you guys have questions or you need me to help facilitate in some way or another, please feel free to reach out. But I appreciate all of you guys making the time today. And just real quick, next policy committee meeting is November 29th, 2 to 3. And our guest speaker is the economic development representative for the entire Pacific region. There's only one in the entire Pacific region, and he lives here in Hawaii. He's amazing, but he's going to talk about the importance of setting up an economic development district in Hawaii, because we have none, and it puts us at a huge disadvantage for EDA grant funding, especially in the aftermath of Maui fires. And then our final one for the year will be with Glenn Wakai. Senator Wakai will join us December 15th, but that one's from 10 to 11 a.m. on a Friday. And I will send reminders out, but I just wanted to remind all of you about that.
Right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Question for you.